Picture a woman in a drawing room in 1875. You have seen her 100 times, even if you have never opened a history book in your life. She is pale as candle wax. She's laced into a corset so tight she can barely draw breath, which is why there is a fainting couch waiting behind her, upholstered in velvet because she faints the way other people sneeze. She was married at 17 to a man she'd met twice. She has never worked a day in her life and never will, because her entire existence is embroidery, visiting cards and staring out of rain-streaked windows. She has never run, never sweated, never lifted anything heavier than a teacup. She bathes perhaps once a year, holding her nose. She is so suffocatingly prudish that the legs of her piano are dressed in little frilled trousers, because the sight of a bare mahogany ankle might bring on one of her faints. Statistically, she will die in childbirth like most of her friends, and if by some miracle she outlives her husband, she will vanish into black crepe and never wear colour again, a small dark ghost drifting through the remaining decades of her life. Hold that picture, look at it closely. The lamplight, the tiny waist, the drooping head, the piano in its trousers. Now I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it before we go any further. Nearly everything in that picture is a lie, not a small lie, not a fuzzy simplification of a complicated truth. A stack of specific, traceable, dateable lies, each with its own birthplace and its own fingerprints, repeated for 100 years by films and novels and school teachers, and worst of all, by the Victorians themselves, until the lies became more famous than the women they buried. Tonight we're going to take that picture apart, piece by piece. 10 lies, exactly 10, counted down from 10 to 1, ranked by 2 things: how many people still believe them and how badly wrong they are. The biggest lie, the one that erased millions of women in a single stroke, comes last. And here are the rules of the game, because a story about lies has to be honest about its own method. Every claim I make tonight comes with a date and a document, a census schedule, an act of parliament, a magazine you could still find in a library, a marriage register with real ink on real paper, where a lie contains a grain of truth, and the best lies always do. That is what keeps them alive. I will show you exactly where the grain ends and the lie begins, because I am not here to swap one myth for its opposite. The corset was real. The mourning code was real. Childbirth could kill you, and the fear of it was rational. The chaperone at the dance was not a costume drama invention. She was a living woman with sharp eyes, and we have talked about her on this channel before. Victorian women's lives were not easy, and nothing tonight will pretend they were. The point is not that the past was secretly comfortable. The point is that it was nothing like the postcard. One more honest note before we begin, because this channel keeps its account straight. The dates, the prices, the acts, the census numbers in tonight's story are real. The eyes I will lend you, the widow at the counter, the laundress at her copper, the weaver in the dark before the mill bell, are composites, stitched together from thousands of real records, because no single woman left us her whole ordinary day. The rooms are real. The documents are real. The women who guide you through them stand in for the ones who really stood there, and I will never pretend to know the private fate of a woman I assembled from an archive. So I make these history stories, and after all these years I honestly still cannot tell whether anyone out there is genuinely asleep, or whether you are all just weirdos who like drifting off to census schedules and the smell of boiling laundry. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Get comfortable. Here we go. Lie number 10. The Victorian widow wore black for the rest of her life. You know this one. You have absorbed it from a dozen films without ever being told it outright. The husband dies, and the wife disappears into a black dress the way other people disappear into a grave. She becomes a permanent shadow at the edge of the family, veiled, silent, done. Her life is over. The black is simply the paperwork. Forever is the word the myth insists on. She wore black forever, because she had to. Let me lend you some eyes. It is a Tuesday morning in March 1877, and you're standing at a long polished counter on Regent Street, in London, inside a shop that exists to dress grief. Jay's, the London General Mourning Warehouse, open since 1841, an entire department store with one subject. The air smells of new cloth and dye and a faint sweetness of beeswax polish, and all around you on stands and shelves and brass rails is black. Black silk, black poplin, black merino, black gloves laid out in rows like sleeping birds, black-edged writing paper, black beaded bonnets, jet brooches glinting under the gas brackets like wet coal. You are 34 years old. Your husband died a little over 2 years ago, of the same fever the newspapers said took Prince Albert. Typhoid, out of a bad well, 3 weeks from first headache to the end. You have worn black ever since, and here is the part the myth never tells you. You're not here this morning to buy black. You're here to buy your way out of it. The shopman who serves you is elderly and soft-voiced, with a tape measure around his neck and a better command of the morning calendar than most clergymen. He does not ask why you want grey. He asks one question, the date of your loss, and does the arithmetic in his head before you've finished saying February. 2 years and a month. His nod is small and precise. Right on time, the nod says. He begins laying bolts of cloth on the counter, and none of them are black. Grey poplin, a soft dove-coloured wool, a mauve trim, folded back so you can see how it will sit against the grey. Your fingers go to the mauve and stop there. You've not touched a colour in more than 2 years. The crepe you lived in for that first year and more is a strange fabric, silk, but crimped and stiffened until it rasps like dry leaves, a cloth designed to refuse light. It catches on the rough skin of your knuckles. In the first winter you learned what every widow learns. That cheap crepe sheds its dye when it rains, and you came home from the cemetery with grey streaks down your wrists, as if the morning were coming off on you. The veil scratched your cheek raw at the funeral. You know black the way a prisoner knows a wall. And the calendar, the same rigid, fussy, much-mocked etiquette that put you into black, is now, with equal firmness, putting you out of it. Because here is what the documents actually say. Cassell's Household Guide, published at the end of the 1860s and sitting on tens of thousands of middle-class shelves, lays the widow's timetable out like a railway schedule. Deepest morning, full crepe, a year and a day. Second morning, the crepe reduced. Ordinary black silk allowed, 9 months more. Then 3 months of plain black without crepe, and then half mourning, grey, lavender, mauve, soft violet, white trim. Somewhere a little past the 2-year mark, the calendar simply ends, and colour is not only permitted, it is expected. A widow still shrouded in full crepe years after her loss was not seen as devoted. She was seen as morbid or theatrical, and the etiquette writers said so in print. The code that dressed grief also had the nerve to undress it, on schedule. And when I say the calendar ends, I need you to understand what that meant in a real street in 1877. It meant the neighbours were watching both directions. Come out of black too early, and the parish whispered, Stay in it too long and the parish whispered differently. There was a window, measured in months, and the whole apparatus of Victorian respectability pushed a widow through it. Widows remarried, and no one fainted about it. Widowers remarried faster, often within a year or two, especially with young children in the house, and the etiquette books barely bothered to scold them, because a man's morning dress was a black hat band and an armband, and his calendar was a fraction of yours. The unfairness ran exactly the way you would expect, but eternity was not on anyone's schedule. There was money in that calendar, and the money is the proof. The Courtauld family built one of the great textile fortunes of the century substantially on mourning crepe, a fabric with no purpose except grief, produced by the mile. Jay's and its rivals ran what amounted to a grief industry, with seasonal stock and advertisements in the papers, and an industry does not thrive on customers who buy one black dress and wear it to their own funerals decades later. It thrives on movement, on deep mourning giving way to second mourning, second to half, half to colour, each stage with its own required purchases. The whole commercial machine was built on the certainty that the black would end. At the counter, the young woman 2 places along from you is going the other way. You can tell at a glance. The blank, scoured look, the mother-in-law beside her doing the talking, the bolts of crepe stacking up. New, a few weeks at most. 2 years ago, that was you, standing in this same shop, unable to care about fabric while somebody older ordered your darkness for you by the yard. You do not speak to her. There's nothing to say that the calendar will not say for you. But when the shopman's boy carries her parcels to the door, you find you are holding the mauve trim tightly enough to crease it. So where did the forever come from? It came from one widow, the most photographed, most painted, most printed widow on earth. Victoria was widowed on the 14th of December 1861, 42 years old, and she wore black for the remaining 40 years of her life. She kept Albert's rooms as he left them, hot water brought in the mornings, his clothes laid out, and here is the detail that kills the myth. Her own subjects thought it was too much. Her long seclusion from public life in the 1860s drew open grumbling in the press, and gave a genuine lift to Republican feeling. The woman would not open Parliament, would not be seen, and the country that adored her also muttered that she was overdoing it. Her eternal black was remarkable precisely because it broke the rules. It was the exception, photographed so many times that the 20th century mistook it for the rule, and Hollywood, which loves a silhouette, put every fictional widow into the Queen's clothes. That is the grain of truth, and here is exactly where it ends. The mourning code was real, rigid, expensive and enforced. A poor woman might have to dye her only good dress, blacken a copper on wash day, and that is a hardship worth remembering. Black for a while was real. Black on a timetable was real. Black forever was one small woman in Windsor, and the whole world behind her, quietly, on schedule, changing back into mauve. You pay for the grey poplin and the mauve trim. The parcel under your arm weighs almost nothing on the omnibus home, and the paper remembers what the myth forgot. In the spring of 1877, a 34-year-old widow walked out of a mourning warehouse carrying colour, and the only person in England who would have disapproved was the Queen. Lie number 9. Childbirth killed most Victorian women. You have heard this one delivered as settled fact, usually in a hushed voice, usually with the word most doing the heavy lifting. Women in those days died in childbirth, people say, the way they might say water is wet, every birth a coin flip, every pregnant woman a condemned woman waiting on the verdict. The Victorian mother, in this telling, is essentially a casualty who has not happened yet, and the era's enormous families are a mystery. Because how did anyone survive long enough to have 9 children if childbirth killed most of the women who attempted it? Sit with that question for a second, because the myth never does. 9 children from a process that supposedly killed most of the women who went through it. The arithmetic collapses before you even open a document. But let us open the documents anyway, because this lie deserves to be taken apart properly, and because inside it there is a real fear and real graves, and we are going to be honest about both. Come with me to a low-ceilinged bedroom in a Shropshire cottage in October 1859, an hour before dawn. You're 29 years old, and you are in labour with your 6th child. You know exactly what this is. That is the first thing the myth gets wrong about this room. The idea that you're a trembling innocent at the mercy of mysterious forces. You've done this 5 times. You know the stages the way a sailor knows weather. You felt the first pains at supper, finished scouring the pot anyway, sent your eldest girl running for the midwife, and told your husband to take the younger ones to his mother's and stay there, in that order, without raising your voice. The room is close and hot because the fire has been built up, and it smells of tallow smoke, lye soap, and the copper tang of what is coming. The midwife arrived before midnight with her own apron and her own scissors, and a bottle of gin that is for her, not for you. She is somewhere past 50, a widow from 2 villages over who has attended more births than the parish register has pages, and her forearms are thicker than your husband's. Between pains, she talks about the price of butter. This is a professional's trick, and you know it, and it works anyway. Her hands, when they press your belly to feel how the child lies, are warm, sure, and completely unhurried. The pain, when it crests, is a wall. Nobody in this room pretends otherwise, least of all me. You grip the twisted sheet tied to the bedpost, her arrangement, the same one her own mother used, and you work. It is work. That is the word every woman in your family has always used, labour, plain as haymaking, and like haymaking it goes on past the point where you believe you can, and then continues into the part where you do it anyway. The candle gutters. The midwife tells you, in the same voice she used for the butter, exactly when to stop fighting and push. A little past 6 in the morning in the grey light, your 2nd son is born, furious and slippery and loud. The midwife ties off and cuts, wraps him tight, checks you over with those unhurried hands, and pronounces both of you sound. By 8 she's drinking tea by the fire. By 9 your mother-in-law has brought the other children back, and the eldest girl is being allowed to hold the baby in a chair she is forbidden to leave. By the following week you are on your feet, against advice. By November you are churning butter with him asleep in a basket at your elbow. It is your 6th delivery. Your mother had 8. Her mother had 10. Now zoom out of that bedroom, because this is where the paper comes in. England had been counting its deaths precisely since 1837, when civil registration began, and a driven man named William Farr at the General Register Office spent his career turning those counts into tables. The tables are still there, and what the Registrar General's returns show for the middle of the century is a maternal death rate of roughly 5 women for every 1,000 births. 5 in 1,000. Turn it around. For every 1,000 women brought to bed in the 1850s, about 995 got up again and went back to their kitchens. 1 birth was not a coin flip. It was a 1 in 200 danger, and I want to be very careful here. because this is exactly where the grain of truth lives, and I promise to show you where it ends. 1 in 200 is not safe. A woman in 1859 did not face the odds your generation faces. She faced something like 100 times worse. And she did not roll the dice once. She rolled them 5, 6, 8, 10 times across a married lifetime. And the arithmetic of repetition meant that something on the order of 1 woman in 30 could expect childbed to be the thing that killed her. Eventually, on the 5th try or the 9th, every woman in that Shropshire village could name names. The blacksmith's first wife, the curate's sister. The fear was not hysteria. It was actuarial. Women wrote wills before confinements. Some wrote letters to be opened by children they might not meet. That dread was real. It was rational, and nothing tonight is allowed to shrink it. But there is an ocean between a serious danger that most women survived repeatedly, and childbirth killed most women. The first is history. The second is a lie off by 2 orders of magnitude. Most Victorian women did not die in childbirth. Most Victorian women did this 5 or 8 times in a farmhouse bedroom with a midwife and a twisted sheet, and lived to be grandmothers, and the census returns full of 60-year-old matriarchs surrounded by grandchildren are the receipts. And here is the detail that will genuinely keep you awake. So I will say it now. Early in the night, the most dangerous place to give birth in the Victorian era was not that cottage. It was the hospital. The great lying-in hospitals of Europe's cities, the places with the doctors, ran maternal death rates that were sometimes many times the national average, and in their worst epidemic months they were charnel houses, because puerperal fever, childbed fever, travelled from bed to bed on the unwashed hands of the medical men themselves. In Vienna in 1847, a Hungarian obstetrician named Ignaz Semmelweis proved it with a natural experiment horrifying in its clarity. The wards staffed by doctors who came straight from the dissecting room killed mothers at several times the rate of the ward staffed by midwives, and when he made the doctors wash their hands in chlorinated lime, the death rate collapsed. For this he was mocked, resisted, and driven out of his career. The men of science would not accept that the fault was on their own hands. Your Shropshire midwife, who never read a medical journal in her life, who attended 1 birth at a time and did not carry the morgue on her fingers, was, without knowing why, the safer bet. The era did fight back, and you should know the dates, because they are part of the true picture the myth erases. In April 1853, Queen Victoria took chloroform from Dr. John Snow for the birth of her 8th child, Prince Leopold, and in doing so made pain relief in childbirth respectable in a single afternoon, over the objections of moralists who held that labour pain was ordained. Antiseptic ideas ground slowly forward through the 1860s and 1870s. Progress was real, uneven and slow. The national maternal death rate would not truly plunge until well into the 20th century. The Victorians did not solve childbirth. They survived it, in their hundreds of thousands, year after year, which is a different and more human thing. So where did the lie come from? Partly from the novels, and it's hard to blame them, because the novelists were writing their own wounds. Dickens opens Dombey and Son in 1846 with a mother dying as her son is born. David Copperfield loses his young mother the same way a few years later. The dead or dying mother is the great engine of 19th century plot, because in a century of real childbed graves she was every reader's private terror, and fiction runs on terror. Partly it came from the graveyards themselves. those headstones reading "also his wife, aged 26, which are real and numerous and photographed beautifully, and are a record of the 5 in 1,000, not the 995. Grief writes in stone. Survival churns butter and leaves no monument. When a later century went looking for the Victorian mother, it found the monuments, because that is all that was left standing where anyone thought to look. The truth is quieter, and it lives in the registers. 99.5 times out of 100 the night ended the way it ended in that Shropshire cottage, with tea by the fire at 8 in the morning, a furious new voice in a tight-wrapped bundle, and a tired woman, frightened beforehand because she was no fool, and upright afterward because she usually was, asking whether anyone had remembered to feed the pig. The danger was real. The fear was real. The dying of most is the lie. The paper remembers the difference, even when the headstones cannot. Lie number 8. Victorian women didn't wash. This one usually arrives wearing a smirk. The past stank, people say, and everyone in it stank equally, and Victorian women in particular drifted through their lives in a fog of their own unwashed selves, bathing once a year, maybe twice, powdering over the rest. The whole era gets filed under before hygiene, as if cleanliness were invented alongside the electric shower, and every person in every daguerreotype is silently, catastrophically ripe. Now, regular listeners will notice something, and I want to meet it head on because this channel does not contradict itself. We have said on other nights, and it remains true, that a full hot bath in a Victorian house was a production. Water hauled and heated by the bucket, a tin or zinc tub dragged before the fire. The whole family sometimes cycling through water that started merely warm and ended merely grey. All true. Full body immersion was expensive in labour, and for many people rare. But here is the move the lie makes, and watch it closely, because it is the same move half the lies tonight make. It takes one true fact. Baths were laborious, and quietly swaps in a much bigger claim. Therefore, nobody washed. As if the bathtub were the only route to a clean human being. The Victorians would have found that logic hilarious, and then they would have handed you a flannel. Let me lend you some eyes, and fair warning, your hands are going to hurt. It is 5:30 on a Monday morning in October 1863, in a brick terrace house in Preston, Lancashire, and you are lighting the fire under the copper, not a kettle. A copper, a great built-in basin in the corner of the scullery with a firebox beneath it, holding gallons, and by the time the mill hooters sound across the town it must be near boiling, because Monday is wash day, and wash day is not a chore. It is a campaign. You know it is Monday without a calendar because the whole street smells the same. Coal smoke first, then, as the sun comes up, the flat mineral smell of soda crystals and the sharp animal bite of lye soap, drifting from every scullery on the row. Monday washing was so nearly universal in the north of England that you could navigate by it. Sunday's roast becomes Monday's cold dinner in thousands of houses at once, because no woman conducting a wash has hands free to cook. By 7 the copper is steaming and the sorting is done. Whites in one pile, coloured in another, your husband's moleskin work trousers, stiff with a week of the foundry, in a pile of their own that you approach the way a farrier approaches a bad-tempered horse. The whites go in first. You feed them into the water with a wooden stick bleached pale as bone by years of this, and then you take up the dolly, a stool-shaped thing on a long handle, set it into the tub, and begin to twist, half turns, over and over, punching and wringing the soapy water through the cloth. 10 minutes of it and your shoulders burn. 20 and you stop noticing. There is a washboard for the collars and cuffs, ridged wood and later zinc, and you scrub the grey out of them with lye soap until the fabric squeaks and the soap finds every crack in your knuckles and reminds you it is made of fat and caustic and means business. Then the rinsing in cold water twice. Then the blue bag, a little muslin knot of synthetic blue, swirled through the final rinse, because a trace of blue tricks the eye into seeing white as whiter, and every housewife on the row knows this piece of optical science without ever once calling it science. Then starch for the collars and the Sunday pinafores, then the mangle, the great cast-iron beast in the yard that you and your neighbour share. Its wooden rollers wide as your thigh, and you feed each sheet in flat while her daughter turns the handle, and the water sheets out of the cloth and runs across the flags, and God help the fingers of the careless, because the mangle does not distinguish between linen and hands. And when I say the whole day, I need you to understand what that means. Washing, rinsing, bluing, starching, mangling and hanging takes from before dawn until the light goes. If it rains, and this is Preston so it rains, the wet linen hangs on racks and lines across the kitchen and drips on everything, and Tuesday, which was meant for ironing, starts damp and behind. Flat irons heated on the range, 2 in rotation, spat on to test the heat, wielded for hours. A single family's wash, 1 week's dirt, consumed the better part of 2 days of a grown woman's labour. Now ask yourself the obvious question. Would a people who did not care about being clean do this to themselves every single week? The Monday wash is only the linen. The body had its own routine, and the documents describe it in exhausting detail. In tens of thousands of bedrooms stood the washstand, jug, basin, soap dish, slop pail, and the daily wash was jug and basin work. Face, neck, ears, arms, and what the manuals delicately called a thorough sponging, in cold water more often than not, cold being held to be bracing and conveniently free. Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, published in 1861 and selling in the hundreds of thousands, walks the mistress and the maid alike through the morning toilette as a matter of course, and the advice literature of the whole era is obsessed, genuinely obsessed, with clean skin, clean linen, and airing. Clean linen most of all. A working man might have 1 shirt to his back, but his wife fought to send him out on Sunday in a shirt that was white, because in a Victorian street linen was the scoreboard. You might be poor, you might be 6 to a room, but a grey collar was a moral verdict, and everyone read it that way. People who did not wash were noticed, pitied, and talked about. That is not a culture indifferent to hygiene. That is a culture that has weaponized it, and the state got involved, which is how you know it mattered. In Liverpool in 1832, a labourer's wife named Kitty Wilkinson, a real documented named woman, and I give you her name precisely because she's not one of my composites, had the only boiler in her street during the cholera epidemic, and she threw her kitchen open so her neighbours could boil their infected linen. Out of that kitchen grew the first public baths and wash-houses, opened in Liverpool in 1842 with Kitty as superintendent, and out of Liverpool grew the Baths and Wash-Houses Acts of 1846 and 1847, empowering towns across the country to build public facilities where a penny or 2 bought hot water, soap, and a place in the queue. And the queues came. Parliament does not legislate bathhouses for a nation that does not want to wash. It legislates them for a nation that wants to wash and cannot afford the coal. Then there is the soap itself, which has a date on it like everything else tonight. Britain taxed soap, actually taxed it, as a luxury, until Gladstone repealed the duty in 1853 and consumption promptly climbed. By the 1880s, soap was one of the great consumer industries of the empire. Sunlight Soap launched in 1884 and built the model factory town of Port Sunlight on the proceeds. Carbolic soaps promised to kill what the new germ theory said was there to kill. The fortunes of the Lever and Pears empires were built bar by bar on the pennies of working-class women. You do not build a soap empire on customers who bathe once a year. So here is the honest shape of it, with the grain of truth exactly where it belongs. Yes, full baths were laborious, plumbing was rare, hot water was hauled, and by your standards the water available to a poor family was scandalously little. Every drop carried from a standpipe or a well, sometimes shared with half a street, and that scarcity was real hardship, not quaintness. Yes, the cities themselves stank. No amount of personal scrubbing could unmake the smell of the ill well or a Bermondsey tannery. But the women inside those cities fought a daily, grinding, knuckle-cracking war against dirt with cold water, lye, and their own shoulders, and mostly they won, and the proof is in the bathhouse ledgers and the soap fortunes and the blue bags and every Monday morning that smelled of soda from one end of Lancashire to the other. By 9 on that October evening in Preston, the last sheet is through the mangle. The kitchen is festooned with damp linen like a ship in irons, and you sit down for the first time since 5:30. Your hands are chapped white at the knuckles, and they sting when you take up your tea. Look at them a moment before the fire. They were not the hands of a dirty people. They were the hands of a woman exhausted from being clean. Lie number 7. Victorian women never exercised. In the standard picture, the Victorian woman moves the way furniture moves, rarely, carefully, and only when carried. She proceeds from sofa to carriage to sofa. Physical exertion is for servants and horses. If she walks at all, it is a decorous shuffle around a garden, 10 minutes, weather permitting, followed by a lie down to recover. Sweat is unthinkable. Speed is unthinkable. Her body is an ornament in storage, and it stays in storage her whole life. Whoever built that picture never stood on an English country road in the summer of 1896. Let me lend you some eyes, and this time some legs. It is a Saturday morning in June 1896 in Surrey, and you are 26 years old, a schoolmistress, and you're doing 11 miles an hour downhill with the wind roaring in your ears and your heart going like a hammer, and you're grinning so hard your face aches. Under you is a safety bicycle, and the word safety matters. It is a technical term because the machine it replaced was the high-wheeled ordinary, the penny farthing, a young man's neck-breaker. The safety, perfected through the late 1880s after John Kemp Starley's Rover of 1885 showed the shape of the future, has 2 equal wheels, a chain drive to the back, and a diamond frame. And since John Boyd Dunlop's pneumatic tyre arrived in 1888, it no longer shakes your teeth loose on the macadam. It has a skirt guard over the back wheel so your hem cannot eat itself in the spokes, a brake you trust on the long hill into the village, and it cost you a term's careful saving second hand, and it is the single most liberating object you have ever owned. Feel the machine for a moment, because the myth says your body is in storage, and your body would like a word. Your calves are hard from a spring of this. Your hands know the road through the grips, the gravel patch by the mill, the good smooth stretch past the hop gardens. You are sweating freely under your blouse, and the air smells as dust and hedgerow and hot rubber, and when the road tilts up, you rise off the saddle and drive the pedals down and breathe like a bellows, deep and even, and nobody within miles thinks any of this is strange because you are not alone out here. You are, in fact, in traffic. The 90s bicycle craze is at its full roaring height in 1896, and on a fine Saturday the roads out of every English town carry processions of riders, and an enormous number of them are women. Shop girls on hired machines, a doctor's wife with a wicker basket, cycling clubs in matched caps taking a wayside inn's front room for lemonade and shandy. The magazines are full of it. The songs are full of it. Daisy Bell and her bicycle built for two was already a hit in 1892. And the punchline is that a machine invented as a young man's toy has been seized in half a decade by exactly the people the age insisted were made of porcelain. And the age noticed, and some of it panicked, and the panic is documented, and the panic is the point. Doctors wrote solemn warnings about bicycle face. The theory that the strain of balancing would set a woman's features in a permanent grimace. Moralists worried about where, precisely, an unchaperoned young woman on a fast machine might go. And here is where I keep faith with what this channel has told you before. The chaperone was real. The rules of supervised courtship were real, and that is exactly why the bicycle terrified the moralists, because it dissolved those rules at 11 miles an hour. A machine that young woman could ride out of sight of every watching aunt in the parish was not just transport, it was jailbreak. In America, Susan B. Anthony told an interviewer in 1896 that bicycling had done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world, and she was only saying loudly what every vicar's daughter on a rover already knew. And the year before, in 1895, Frances Willard, the most famous temperance reformer alive, a woman of 53 with a heart condition, published an entire book, A Wheel Within a Wheel, about the ecstatic, stubborn process of learning to ride, on the grounds that a woman who could master a bicycle would remember she could master other things. Now, the bicycle is the loud example, the one with the date stamped on it. But the myth of the immobile Victorian woman was false long before 1885, and the quieter evidence is everywhere once you look. Start with the most ordinary thing on earth, walking. The Victorians walked distances that would qualify as endurance events on your calendar, and the women walked with everyone else. A servant's half-day off might be spent walking 4 miles to her mother's cottage and 4 miles back. Factory girls walked to the mill in clattering crowds, and the leisured classes, the very women the myth says were in storage, institutionalized the daily constitutional and thought nothing of a 6 or 8 mile country tramp. Read the era's own fiction, which is a record of its habits. Elizabeth Bennet, back in 1813, already scandalizes a drawing room not by walking 3 miles through mud, but merely by arriving with a dirty hem. The walking itself is normal enough that only the mud is worth discussing. The pattern holds straight through the century. Victorian ladies climb the Lake District fells for pleasure, and the record books of the 1860s and 1870s contain Lucy Walker, first woman up the Matterhorn in 1871, a real named documented woman, not one of my composites, with rivals at her heels and a ladies' alpine club following in 1907 as the era's logical full stop. Then come the lawn games, with dates on them like everything tonight. Croquet swept the country in the 1860s precisely because it was a game the sexes played together. The All England Croquet Club, founded at Wimbledon in 1868, and contemporaries understood perfectly well that its real attraction was legitimate outdoor flirtation with mallets as chaperones. Then in 1874, Major Walter Wingfield patented his lawn tennis set, and within a decade tennis had eaten croquet's lawns. The Wimbledon Championships added a ladies' singles title in 1884, won by 19-year-old Maud Watson in corset, petticoats, and a ground-length skirt, and one, mark you, over a draw of 13 women all willing to run for a title in public. Archery had been respectable for ladies for generations. Riding was an accomplishment. A hard-riding woman to hounds, side saddle over blackthorn hedges, was performing one of the more dangerous athletic feats available to any Victorian of either sex, and the hunting field had plenty of her. At the seaside, the bathing machine, that rolling wooden changing hut we've met before on this channel, trundled women into the surf by the tens of thousands every August. And in the schools the revolution had already begun. The pioneering girls' colleges from the 1850s onward put calisthenics and drill on the timetable, and by the 1880s and 1890s the great girls' schools had hockey teams and gymnasiums, with Madame Bergman Eusterberg training an entire new profession of female physical education mistresses in London from 1885. So let me mark the grain of truth precisely, because there is one, and it matters. The playing field was never level. Medical orthodoxy really did preach that a woman's energy was a fixed fund best reserved for motherhood. Girls really were pulled back from vigorous games at puberty in respectable families. The clothes really did constrain. You cannot sprint in a ground-length skirt, and nobody did. Competitive sport for women met ridicule at every step, and the woman who went too far, too visibly, paid for it in reputation. All of that is true, and none of it adds up to a nation of women in storage. It adds up to a nation of women who walked 6 miles before tea, played 5 games of tennis, swam in September surf, climbed actual Alps, and then, in the last 15 years of the century, took to the bicycle in their hundreds of thousands. While a chorus of medical men explained in print that none of this should be possible, where did the lie come from? From reading the chorus and ignoring the road. The conduct books and the doctor's warnings survived in libraries, tidy and quotable, and a later century mistook the scolding for the life. The sweat, meanwhile, evaporated the way sweat does, and the films once again preferred the drawing room, because a heroine on a chaise longue holds still for the camera in a way a heroine doing 11 miles an hour never will. Back on the Surrey road, the hill bottoms out and the lane runs flat between the hedges, and you ease off and coast chest-heaving, blouse stuck to your back, ears full of wind and blood. The church clock across the field says 10. You've done 14 miles since breakfast. You will do 14 more home after lunch, and on Monday morning you will stand in front of 40 children with chalk dust on your fingers, and not one soul in the village will call any of it remarkable. The fainting couch never came fitted with a bicycle rack. Somebody should have found that suspicious a century sooner. Lie number 6. Victorian women were such prudes that they covered the legs of their pianos. This is the crown jewel of the whole mythology, the detail everyone knows, the one that gets wheeled out at dinner parties as the final proof of an era gone mad with modesty. The Victorian lady, the story goes, was so mortified by the human body that the mortification leaked outward onto the furniture, and pianos across England stood with their mahogany ankles decently trousered in little frilled pantalettes, lest the sight of a curved wooden leg inflame somebody's imagination. It is vivid. It is hilarious. It is repeated in classrooms to this day, and it is traceable precisely to the page, to a joke. A joke, moreover, that was never about Victorian England at all. Here is the paper trail, and I want you to watch how short it is. In 1839, 2 years into Victoria's reign, before the myth's supposed golden age had even begun, a British naval captain and popular novelist named Frederick Marryat published a diary in America, an account of his travels in the United States, written in the well-worn genre of Englishman abroad finds the colonials ridiculous. Marryat tells 2 furniture-adjacent anecdotes. In one, a young American lady takes offence when he uses the word leg of her scraped shin, informing him that the polite American word is limb. Even, she concedes when pressed, for the limb of a table. In the other, he visits a seminary for young ladies near Niagara Falls where, he claims, the mistress of the establishment had dressed her square piano's 4 limbs in modest little trousers with frills at the bottom, to preserve in their utmost purity the ideas of the young ladies under her charge. That is it. That is the entire foundation. One English satirist telling his English readers a funny story about American squeamishness, a story historians have long suspected was either a leg pull played on the credulous captain by his American hosts, or simple invention, because Marryat was a professional entertainer with a book to sell, and no witness has ever corroborated a single trousered piano anywhere. American commentators at the time returned fire by calling the story absurd, and notice the direction of the joke. The Englishman is the worldly one laughing, the imaginary prude is American. Somewhere across the following century the story crossed the Atlantic backward, shed its origin, and reattached itself to the very people who had invented it as mockery, until the Victorian drawing room of all places became the scene of the crime. If you want a definition of how myths work, there it is. A joke about somebody else, retold until it becomes evidence about you. Now let me lend you some eyes and show you what a real piano in a real drawing room looked like. It is a February evening in 1868 in a solid brick villa in Camberwell, South London, and you're 22 years old, and you're sitting at the piano with a young man standing much too close to your left shoulder on the pretext of turning your music. The piano is your mother's pride. A rosewood cottage upright, bought on instalments from a dealer on Cheapside, kept polished to a dark mirror with linseed and turpentine, until you can see the candle flames doubled in its flank. Its legs, carved, turned, frankly ornamental, designed by the maker to be admired, stand bare on the carpet for all the world to see, tonight and every night, exactly like every other piano in every other parlour in England. Run your eye around the room while the young man fumbles the page. Furniture legs everywhere, the sofa's scrolled feet, the whatnot spindles, the card table's cabriole curves. Nobody has ever trousered any of it. Nobody ever will. In 30 years of evenings in this room, the only person who will ever mention a piano-wearing trousers is a cousin who read Captain Marryat's American book and thought it was funny. Because it was. That was the point. But stay in this room a moment longer, because the scene around that bare-legged piano tells you something better than the debunk. Look at what is actually happening. The young man at your shoulder is courting you, in public by arrangement, in the era's approved style, and the era's approved style is not the frozen sexlessness of the myth. There is a fire, there is your married sister pouring tea with one eye on you both, there's a game of forfeits planned for later that half the room is already giggling about, and there is the sheet music itself, which is a love song, because the parlour ballad industry of the 1860s ran almost entirely on longing, partings, meetings, and hearts in various states of documented distress. Every February the stationers sell valentines by the million. The post office groans under them. The papers report the tonnage. And some of the cheap ones are frankly saucy. At the seaside in August, the same respectable families who sit in this parlour will bob about in the surf and buy comic postcards. The 3-volume novels on the table downstairs turn on seduction, bigamy, and ruin. Lady Audley's Secret sold in its tens of thousands in 1862, and your mother has read it twice. And when I say the Victorians talked about the body, I need you to understand what that means, because this is where the honest nuance lives. They did not talk about it the way your century does, loudly, everywhere, in mixed company. They ran a system of verbal zoning. In the drawing room, before unmarried girls, the rules were genuinely strict. Certain words unsaid, certain subjects folded away. Pregnancy alluded to sideways as an interesting condition, and the chaperone, real, as this channel has always told you, enforcing the perimeter. That is the grain of truth, and it was rigid enough to chafe. But step out of the drawing room and the same civilization was discussing the body constantly and in detail. Medical marriage manuals sold steadily for decades. The Lancet debated obstetrics in print. The divorce court, opened by the Act of 1857, filled newspaper columns with adultery evidence so explicit that respectable papers agonized, profitably, about publishing it, and Sunday papers built circulations in the hundreds of thousands on exactly that agonizing. The same era that would not say leg before a debutante read court testimony over breakfast, that would raise a modern eyebrow. Prudery was not the absence of sex from the Victorian world. It was a filing system for it. This drawer public, that drawer locked, and everyone perfectly aware of what the locked drawer held. A nation genuinely as innocent as the myth claims does not produce an average family of 5 and 6 children, and does not need an Obscene Publications Act, which Parliament passed in 1857 because there was, demonstrably, an enormous amount of obscenity in circulation to publish an act about. So how did the trousered piano conquer the world? Because the 20th century needed it. Around the time of the First World War, a new generation went to war against its grandparents' morality, and the writers of that generation, brilliant, unfair, and quotable, built the Victorian as a stock figure of repression to define themselves against. The word Victorian itself became an insult, meaning prude, and a stock figure needs props. Marriott's piano, 80 years old and ownerless, was sitting right there. It was too good to check. It has been too good to check ever since, which is why you heard it from a teacher who heard it from a book that heard it from a satire of somebody else entirely. Back in Camberwell the song ends. The young man says something about your touch on the keys that is technically about music. Your sister's teacup clicks down at precisely the correct volume, a small domestic gunshot meaning that will do, and the young man steps back exactly 8 inches, and everyone in the room understands everything that has just happened, because they are not innocents. They are experts, operating a code so fine-grained it can measure 8 inches in a teacup. The piano's legs stand bare in the firelight the way they always did. Nobody looks. Nobody ever needed to. And the frilled trousers exist in one place only. A traveller's joke from 1839, pointed the other way across an ocean, while the era it slandered goes on flirting quite competently, 3 feet above the allegedly scandalous mahogany. Lie number 5. Victorian women couldn't own property. Full stop, no exceptions. That is how the lie is usually told. No woman could own a house, hold money, keep her wages, sign a lease. Everything belonged to some man somewhere, father, husband, brother, it hardly mattered which. The Victorian woman, in this version, was legally a piece of property herself, and remained so until some unspecified modern dawn. This one is the trickiest lie of the night, because it is a real injustice with the edges melted off. There is a genuine legal outrage at the centre of it, one of the great outrages of English law, and I will give it to you whole, with its dates. But the lie takes that outrage, which applied to particular women in particular decades under particular conditions, and smears it across every woman in the entire century, and in doing so it commits its own quiet insult. It erases the tens of thousands of Victorian women who owned shops, cottages, government stock, and whole streets of houses, and it erases the 40-year public war that women fought, in print and in Parliament's lobbies, to break the law that wronged the rest. You cannot fight a 40-year war if you are furniture. So let us get the truth straight, in order. Begin with the outrage, because honesty begins there. The doctrine was called coverture, and it was ancient long before Victoria. William Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, published in 1765, and still the standard legal furniture of every Victorian solicitor's office states it with terrible elegance. By marriage, the husband and wife are one person in law, and that person, as the saying went, was the husband. The wife's legal existence was suspended, covered, folded into his. On her wedding day, a woman's personal property, her money, her furniture, her earnings, the coins in her actual purse, became her husband's absolutely. Her freehold land he could not sell outright, but its rents and management were his for the marriage. What she earned by her own hands, his. This was not a technicality. A drunkard could drink his wife's wages lawfully. A brute could empty his wife's shop till and the law would nod. In the late 1870s, Millicent Garrett Fawcett, a real and documented woman, and the future leader of the constitutional suffragists, had her purse snatched at Waterloo Station, and heard the thief charged with stealing goods, the property of Henry Fawcett. She wrote later that she felt as if she herself had been convicted of theft for carrying her own purse. That is coverture in one anecdote, and the anger in it is the anger of the age itself. So there is the grain of truth, and it is no grain, it is a boulder. Now watch where its edges actually are, because the lie depends on your never checking. First edge. Coverture applied to married women. English law knew another creature entirely, the femme sole, the unmarried woman, the widow, and she could own, buy, sell, lease, mortgage, invest, sue, and be sued in her own name, all century long exactly like a man. This was not a loophole, it was the ordinary law of the land, operating every day in every town. Spinsters held cottages and lent money at interest. Widows carried on their late husbands' businesses under their own names. The trade directories of any Victorian town list them by the column. Printer, ironmonger, victualler, all with Mrs. or Miss in front. When the railways boomed, women bought shares. The shareholder registers of the great lines carry thousands upon thousands of female names, spinsters and widows drawing dividends on their own signatures. Somewhere around one landlord in 6 in parts of Victorian England was a landlady. None of this was scandalous. It was Tuesday. Second edge. Even for married women, the rich had long since bought their way around the rule. Equity, the parallel court system, allowed a bride's family to lock her fortune in a marriage settlement, a trust that kept it out of the husband's reach, and by the Victorian era this was standard practice in every propertied family. The lawyer's fees were, in effect, the price of exempting your daughter from the common law, which exposes the true shape of the injustice. Coverture by mid-century bore hardest not on duchesses, but on exactly the women with no family lawyer, the shopkeeper's wife, the mill hand, the seamstress whose shillings were legally her husband's beer money. The Victorians themselves said this loudly. That is why the campaign, when it came, was framed as a working woman's cause. And the campaign came, and it is the part of the story the lie deletes entirely. From the 1850s, committees of women, Barbara Bodison's circle first, with her plain-spoken 1854 pamphlet on the laws concerning women, then decades of petitions with tens of thousands of signatures, dragged coverture into the light. In 1870, Parliament yielded the first ground. The Married Women's Property Act of that year let a married woman keep her own wages and earnings and certain savings and investments as her separate property. Half a loaf, badly cut, but the principle had cracked. Then, in 1882, the Second Act broke it. From the 1st of January 1883, a married woman in England and Wales could hold, acquire and dispose of property, real and personal, whatever she brought to the marriage or gained after, as her own separate estate, contract in her own name, sue and be sued. The doctrine that a wife's purse belonged to her husband died on a specific printed parliamentary date within Victoria's own reign, with 18 years of that reign still to run. The Victorians did not merely commit this injustice, they are also the people who abolished it. Now let me lend you some eyes, because the difference between 1869 and 1884 deserves a room and a smell. It is a Friday evening in January 1884, above a stationer's shop on Deansgate in Manchester, and you are 38 years old, and you're doing something with a pen that your mother was never once in her married life permitted to do. You're writing your own name at the head of your own ledger. The shop below is yours, not yours the way the parlour china was yours by courtesy, revocable at a husband's whim, yours at law. It came to you from your aunt, a feme soul all her days, who ran it for 30 years, took you behind her counter for the last 4 of them, and died at the end of March 1883. 12 weeks, that is, after the new Act came into force, a piece of timing she would have relished because she read the law reports the way other women read serials, and she told you plainly that last winter that she meant to see the thing made law before she went. Had she died in 1879, when the cough first turned ugly, the whole legacy, shop, stock, goodwill, would have slid under your husband's management before the ink of the probate was dry, because that was the law in 1879, and you knew exactly what that looked like. It had happened to your cousin in 1874. A millinery business swallowed whole into a husband's careless hands, lawfully, inside a fortnight. He was not a cruel man, your cousin's husband. The age was full of far worse. He was merely careless, and the law made his carelessness legal, and her competence irrelevant. Instead, your aunt outlived the old law by 12 weeks, and the shop and every farthing it earns came to you under the Act of 1882 as your own separate property, held, in the Act's own quiet, revolutionary phrase, as if you were a femmy soul. Feel the ledger under your hand, cold-pressed paper, faint blue rulings, the good smell of a stationer's stock all around you, fresh ink, glue, pencil shavings, the dusty vanilla of paper by the ream. The gas bracket hisses over the desk. Downstairs the shutters are up and bolted. The till is counted. The takings for the week sit in a japanned cash box at your elbow, and on Monday you will carry them to the bank and pay them into an account bearing your name, an account the manager opened for you last spring with a small dry cough, consulting the Act's wording twice, because you were the third married woman that month, and the branch was still getting used to it. Your husband keeps to his own trade, and the two of you have arrived, with some silences along the way, at the novel arrangement the law now assumes: 2 adults, 2 purses, 1 roof. On the flyleaf of the ledger you write the date, and then, because your aunt used to do it, the old shopkeeper's line, entered by her own hand. Your mother, who is 66 and lives with you, watched you rule the columns last quarter day, and said nothing for a long while. Her own wages as a young dressmaker, every shilling for 9 years, had gone by right to a husband who drank most of them. There was no drama in her watching. There was just a woman looking at a page she had never been allowed to own, in her daughter's handwriting. So where did the flattened lie come from? Women couldn't own property, no dates, no edges, partly from the sheer memorability of coverture itself. Blackstone's phrase is so stark that it swallows the century around it. Partly from campaigners' own rhetoric quoted later without its dates. The speeches of 1868 read, to a careless modern eye, like descriptions of 1898. And partly, once again, from the drawing-room lens. If your whole image of the Victorian woman is a sheltered wife, you will never think to ask who owned the boarding house she summered at, or the shop she bought her gloves in, or the 6 cottages down the lane. The answer, startlingly often, was a woman with a rent book and a solicitor. The law wronged Victorian wives gravely for decades, that stands. And Victorian women measured the wrong, petitioned it, shamed it, and broke it, and the proof is a ledger in Manchester with a woman's name at the head of it, entered by her own hand in January 1884. The paper remembers her. It was hers to write on. Lie number 4. Victorian women all married young. Everyone knows this one so thoroughly that nobody thinks to say it out loud. It is simply the water the costume dramas swim in. The Victorian girl, the story goes, was married off at 16 or 17, 18 at the very latest, to whichever gentleman her father produced. By 20 she had 2 children. By 23, if still single, she was a tragedy. An old maid, shelved for life. And this happened to everyone, everywhere. From the Duke's daughter to the dairymaid. Child brides as far as the eye can see. An entire civilization of teenage weddings. And of all the lies tonight, this is the one the documents kill most cleanly, because marriage is the single best documented act in any Victorian life. Every wedding in England and Wales after 1837 went into the civil registers. Name, age, condition, occupation, father's name, ink on paper, copied to Somerset House, and the Registrar General added the ages up every single year and printed the results. This is not a matter of interpretation. It is a matter of arithmetic that has been sitting in blue books for 160 years waiting for someone to look. Here is what the arithmetic says. Across the Victorian decades, the average age at first marriage in England and Wales sat around 25 for women and around 26 or 27 for men, and it drifted upward as the century went on, so that by the 1880s and 1890s, a bride of 26 was not an outlier, but the ordinary case. Teenage marriage was not the rule anywhere in the social order. It was uncommon at every level, and rarest of all, interestingly, among the working classes of the industrial towns, where a girl of 19 was usually far too economically useful to herself to be in any hurry. Let me say the number again. because it has to displace a century of costume drama to find room in your head. 25. The average Victorian bride was a grown woman in her mid-twenties, older at her wedding than a great many brides of the 1950s. Your grandmother's generation in the age of television, married younger than the Victorians did. Sit with that one. The past is not a slope running smoothly backward toward child marriage. The mid-20th century, not the 19th, is the great age of the very young bride. Now let me lend you some eyes. On the one night of the decade when the whole country stood still to be counted, it is Sunday the 7th of April, 1861, census night, in 2 rooms above a milliner's shop in Bristol, and you are 27 years old and unmarried, and you're filling in the household schedule by lamplight with a steel pen that catches on the cheap paper. The schedule wants the facts of everyone under this roof tonight, and under this roof tonight there are 3 women and no men. Yourself first as head of the household. Read that phrase again, because the myth says it cannot exist. Head, name, condition, unmarried, age, last birthday, 27, rank, profession or occupation, milliner. Then your assistant, 19, unmarried, milliner's assistant, who lodges with you and snores through the wall like a bee in a bottle. Then your lodger in the back room, a schoolteacher of 31, unmarried, 3 unmarried women, all working, one of them keeping the roof over the other 2. The enumerator who collects this schedule on Monday will not blink at it. He will walk your street collecting dozens like it. The 2 dressmaker sisters at number 9, the widowed staymaker and her unmarried daughter at the corner, the confectioner's 3 grown girls, all still at home and all behind the counter, because this is what the ordinary streets of an English city actually contained, and the census wrote it all down. Feel the room while the ink dries. Coals settling in the grate. The workroom smell that never leaves your parlour, because your parlour is the workroom. Buckram and glue, silk ribbon, the hot metal ghost of the pressing iron, a bowl of waxed cherries for trimming waiting on the table like improbable fruit. Tomorrow is Monday, and the spring bonnets are wanted for Easter. And your order book, you keep it yourself in your own name, theme soul, as we established a lie ago, is as full as it has been since you opened. You did 3 years apprenticed, 4 years as an assistant, saved like a miser, and took over this shop's lease at 25. Your name is painted over the door in gold-shadowed letters you inspect, secretly, with pride, every single morning. And here is what the myth insists you must be feeling, alone with your schedule at 27. Tragedy, shelf dust, panic. So let us be honest about what the age actually dealt you, because, as with every lie tonight, there is a grain of truth, and I will show you its exact edges. Yes, the words old maid were in the air, and they had teeth. The comic papers ran spinster jokes. Aunts made pointed remarks at Christmas. The novels you read are crowded with women for whom marriage is the plot, because for the property classes marriage was the plot. The great transfer of fortune and status. The thing a genteel girl with no trade was for. In those drawing rooms, a daughter nearing 30 unwed was a genuine anxiety, and the pressure on her was real and could be cruel. That is the grain. But notice its boundary. It is a class boundary. The anxiety belonged chiefly to families with settlements to arrange and no respectable way for a daughter to earn. One floor down the social ladder, where women had trades, the arithmetic of urgency ran completely differently, and most Victorian women lived one floor down. Because here is the engine underneath the marriage registers, the reason for that number 25, and it is beautifully unromantic. Prudence. In Victorian England, you did not marry until you could set up a household, and setting up a household cost years. A young man needed his trade established, his wage steady. A young woman in service or a workshop spent her early 20s accumulating the linen, the savings, the mattress, the pans, the plenishing, that turned a wedding from a leap into a plan. Servants, that vast army we will meet properly later tonight, married latest of all, because every year in a good place added to the nest egg. Courtships ran 2, 3, 4 years. The banns were called when the arithmetic worked, not when the heart first thumped. The Victorians, whom the myth paints as reckless children hurled into wedlock, were in cold fact among the most cautious marriers in their own history. The historian's phrase for the whole pattern, running back centuries in northwestern Europe, is the European marriage pattern, late marriage by mutual consent upon economic readiness. The teenage bride hustled to the altar was the exception, and here is the wicked footnote. When she did appear in numbers, it was oftener at the top of society than the bottom in the dynastic marriages of the aristocracy, the one class that could afford not to wait. The myth took the habits of duchesses and fiction and awarded them to everybody, and some women, of course, never married at all. And the age knew it, counted it, and argued about it at the top of its voice, which is itself proof. The census of 1851 turned up roughly 500,000 more women than men in Britain. Emigration, empire, and the army had carried the men abroad. And the discovery set off a genuine national debate about what the press called surplus, or redundant women. In 1862, the essayist William Rathbone Gregg published a notorious piece asking in so many words, "Why are women redundant?" and proposing, with a straight face, to solve the problem by shipping the unmarried women to the colonies where the men were. The women in question had other ideas. Within a decade, the surplus women debate was feeding directly into the campaigns for female education and employment, on the sensible grounds that a woman who might well never marry had better be able to keep herself, but keep the underlying number. Through the Victorian decades, something like 1 woman in 8, and in some cohorts closer to 1 in 6 or 7, never married at all. Multiply that across a population, and you get what the census shows and the myth cannot digest. Hundreds of thousands of adult single women running schools and shops and post offices, lodging together in 2s and 3s over milliners' shops in Bristol, visible on every page of every enumerator's book, an entire, permanent, ordinary estate of unmarried womanhood, in the very civilization your books told you married everyone off at 17. So where did the lie come from? From 3 directions at once. From above, the aristocratic exception, endlessly novelized, in which 17-year-old heiresses marry for the plot's convenience. From behind, a genuine blur with earlier centuries and other places, Juliet's 14 summers seeping forward into everything pre-modern, until all of the past becomes one undifferentiated land of child brides. And from Hollywood, which casts 20-year-olds to play everyone anyway, and has never once put a bride's age in a caption. Against all that stood only the registers. And the registers, as you may have noticed by now, is a fight the registers always win if anyone opens them. In Bristol, you blot the schedule and set it on the mantel for the enumerator, and the lamp fizzes, and through the wall the 19-year-old snores her steady bee-song. Perhaps you will marry. Women of 27 did, constantly. The registers are full of brides of 28 and 30 and 35, and of widows remarrying at 50, and nobody sewed a scarlet letter on any of them. Perhaps you will not, and the shop will go on being yours, and the gold letters over the door will be repainted every third spring, and the schedules of 1871 and 1881 will find you here still, head of household, milliner, and the enumerator still will not blink. Both doors stand open. That is the fact the myth could never hold. At 27, on census night 1861, with your name over the door and your order book full, both doors stand open, and the choosing either way is not a tragedy. It is nearly midnight. The bonnets are wanted by Easter. You turn down the lamp, lie number 3. Every Victorian woman was a housewife, sealed inside the home in a world of separate spheres. This is the structural lie, the load-bearing wall that holds most of the others up. It goes like this. The Victorians divided creation neatly in two, a public sphere of work, money and streets for men, and a private sphere of hearth, children, and needlework for women. And every woman actually lived that way. Man goes out, woman stays in. The home was her whole map. If the earlier lies were about what Victorian women were like, this one is about where they were, and its answer is indoors, all of them, always. Now, unlike the trousered piano, this lie was not invented by a later century. This one the Victorians built themselves on purpose in beautiful prose and sold hard, which is exactly why it deserves the most careful demolition of the night. Because the separate spheres were absolutely real, as an ideal, as a sermon, as a wish. What they never were, for the enormous majority of the population, is a description of anybody's actual Tuesday. Let me show you the sermon first, with its dates, so you can recognise it when it is quoted back to you as history. In 1854, Coventry Patmore began publishing a long poem called The Angel in the House, canonising the wife as a self-sacrificing domestic saint whose vocation was the moral atmosphere of her home. It sold modestly at first and massively later, and its title became the era's shorthand for ideal womanhood. In 1865, John Ruskin, the most influential art critic alive, delivered the lecture printed in Sesame and Lilies as of Queen's Gardens. Man's power is active and defensive for the open world. Woman's is for sweet ordering and decision within the walls. The home, wherever she is a sacred place, a walled garden. It is gorgeous. It was given as a lecture to raise money and was reprinted for decades and handed to schoolgirls as a prize book. At the conduct manuals, Mrs. Ellis's Women of England in 1839 telling wives their business was to be agreeable and good. Add the Queen on the throne modelling domestic virtue with her 9 children, and you have a complete, coherent, magnificently documented ideology. There it stands. Now put it down and pick up the census. Because the same civilization that printed of Queen's Gardens also printed, every 10 years, an occupational table of the entire population, and the two documents flatly disagree. We will spend the whole of line number 1 inside those tables, so for now 1 street's worth. The census returns of the 1860s and 1870s list women, by the tens of thousands under their own names, as farmers, as innkeepers and licensed victuallers, as butchers, bakers, grocers, drapers, as blacksmiths, usually widows running the forge with journeymen under them, but running it, answering for it, taxed on it, as schoolmistresses, postmistresses, lodging-house keepers, laundry proprietors, dressmakers with employees of their own. The trade directory of any market town in 1870 reads like a direct rebuttal of Ruskin composed by an accountant. The walled garden had a shop counter in it, and the shop counter had a queue. Let me lend you some eyes. In the trade, the returns show women running more often than almost any other. It is 5:30 on a raw October morning in 1871 in a coaching inn on the Trent Valley Road in Staffordshire, and you are 46 years old, and you've already been up for an hour, and the licence over your front door, painted fresh last spring, as the law requires it displayed, reads, "Licence to sell ale, porter, and spirituous liquors." The name in front of that phrase is yours. The inn came to you the way such places usually came to a woman, through 23 years of running it in fact and 4 years now of running it in name, since the morning your husband did not wake. The brewery had its doubts for about a fortnight, until the quarter's accounts came in. The magistrates transferred the licence at the next sessions with no more ceremony than a signature, because licensed victualling was so ordinary a widow's trade that the bench would have been puzzled by any fuss. You're one of thousands. In every English town, some solid fraction of the public houses are kept by women. The census will count them this very year, and reach past 20,000 nationally without straining. And nobody, from the brewery agent to the bishop, considers the fact worth a remark. Stand in your own passage a moment and take inventory through your senses, because the myth says your map ends at a parlour wall, and your map this morning is a small logistics empire. Cellar first, down the stone steps in the tallow-smelling dark, where you tap the fresh barrel yourself. The spile squeaks, the mallet knocks, the ale hisses, and you catch the first cloudy pint to check it clears. Because a landlady who cannot keep her own cellar is a landlady whose beer goes sour, and yours does not go sour. Kitchen next, the range already roaring, the cook yours. You employ 5 people, 2 of them men, with bacon on and bread proving, because the Birmingham carrier and his boy will bang through the door at 6 wanting breakfast for 4. And the commercial travellers upstairs rang for hot water 10 minutes ago. Yard. Your ostler is backing a mare into the shafts of the mail cart, and you check the girth yourself in passing, because last month he buckled it careless and you told him once, quietly, in front of the horse, and there has been nothing wrong with the girth since. Passage again. The brewery dray is due at 8. And the drayman will try as he tries every quarter to leave you a barrel short weight, and he will fail because you keep the tally book, and the tally book, like every other consequential piece of paper in this establishment, the licence, the lease, the wage book, the magistrate's notices, has your name on it. And when I say your day is the public sphere, I need you to understand what that means in an inn on a coaching road in 1871. Money passes through your hands from before dawn until the last pot is drawn at night. You price, you buy, you extend credit and refuse it. You read the market page in the county paper to time your hay. The law passes through your hands. You answer to the licensing bench for every hour you're open and every drunk you fail to turn out. And twice a year you stand up in the magistrate's room, a woman in a good bonnet in the most public building in the district, and answer for your house. Politics happens in your taproom whether you like it or not, and you police it with a bar towel. Strangers, dozens a day, every day, for 30 years. The sphere you actually live in is about as private as a railway platform. Now the grain of truth, marked out honestly, because this lie holds the biggest one of the night. The separate sphere's ideal was not just talk. For the middle classes, the doctor's wife, the merchant's daughters, the clerk's household straining toward gentility, it had real teeth. A wife visibly working was in those circles a wound to her husband's standing, and plenty of capable women were retired into parlours by prosperity itself, some gratefully, some going quietly mad with underuse. The era's own literature is full of the second kind. The professions were barred and stayed barred for decades. No woman physician on the British Register until Elizabeth Garrett Anderson forced the door in 1865. No vote all reign, the universities grudging and partial, and even below the middle class the ideal exerted a pull. The respectable working man boasted of a wife who did not have to go out to work, and reformers wrote it into their vision of the decent home. As aspiration, the walled garden reached deep, all true, and none of it stands against the counting. The class that could actually afford the ideal, one income, servants kept, wife withdrawn, was perhaps one household in 5 on a generous count. The sermon was preached to everyone. The life it described was purchasable by a minority, and even inside that minority, as we saw a few lies ago, the wife it idealized was frequently running rental property, keeping the books, or managing a staff with Mrs. Beeton in one hand. Mrs. Beeton, who in 1861 compared the mistress of a household to the commander of an army, which is a strange way to describe an ornament. So where did this lie come from? This one the Victorians manufactured themselves. It is the era's own propaganda, its Sunday best self-portrait, painted precisely because the reality fell so far short of it. And later centuries committed the historian's original sin. They mistook the sermon for the congregation. The conduct books survived. They are eloquent and quotable and conveniently shelved. The tally books survive too. They are in the county record offices smelling of damp and beer. But nobody quotes a tally book at a dinner party. So the poem became the history, and the 20,000 landladies became invisible, along with the farmers and the postmistresses and the blacksmiths' widows. One entire working nation of women filed under a poem about an angel. At noon your taproom is full, the mail has changed horses in your yard, and you draw a half pint of your own bitter and drink it standing at the cellar head, in the cool that smells of sawdust and hops, the one still moment of the day. Through the floorboards the public sphere hums in your public house. The angel in the house was a poem. The license over the door was a fact. When a poem and a license disagree, believe the license. Lie number 2. Corsets crushed every Victorian woman into a 16-inch waist, which is why they fainted all the time, and why their organs were mangled, and why some of them had ribs surgically removed. Here is the myth at full strength, and you have seen every frame of it. The heroine gripping the bedpost while a maid hauls the laces with her knee braced, the whalebone cage, the swoon onto the fainting couch, the whispered legend of the rib operation. In this telling, every woman in the British Isles spent 6 decades laced to the edge of asphyxiation, walking wounded from breakfast to bed, and the corset stands as the whole era compressed into a single instrument of torture. This lie ranks second tonight because it is the one most people would bet money on, and because taking it apart requires the finest scalpel of the night. The corset is not innocent, and I am not here to acquit it. I am here to separate a real garment, worn by real working bodies, from a caricature built out of satire, fetish letters, and one scene in a film about Georgia, and to show you precisely which parts of the horror are documented and which parts are theatre. Let me lend you some eyes in the dark before the mill. It is 5:20 on a January morning in 1885, in a 2-up 2-down in Oldham, Lancashire, and you're 24 years old, a 4-loom weaver, dressing by feel because lighting a candle for dressing is a waste of a candle. The floor is ice under your stockinged feet. You can hear your sister breathing in the bed you've just left, and the first far-off factory hooter testing the darkness. Chemise first, cold as pond water. As then you reach for the thing the myth says is torturing you, and your hands find it on the chair back exactly where your hands always find it. Your stays. Listen to what they actually are, because the myth has never once looked at them. Not silk, not scarlet, no lace worth the name. Cotton jean, twilled, drab as a flour sack, quilted stiff with rows of cording and a few strips of whalebone, with a steel busk up the front that your body heat will take the chill off in a minute or two. They fasten in front, busk studs, click, 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 10 seconds in the dark. No maid, no bedpost. The laces behind long since adjusted to your shape and left alone, because nobody on this street has a servant to haul them, and nobody has the slightest wish for it. The gap between the back edges is a good 3 fingers. You bought them from the draper for a few shillings. Sized by waist like boots are sized by feet, and when they wear soft you will buy the same again. And here is the sentence the whole lie has been dodging for a century. They are comfortable, more than comfortable, wanted. In 30 seconds you will be hauling on layers of skirt whose weight needs a firm hip to sit on. In an hour you will be standing on a flag floor in front of 4 power looms, and you will stand there, bar the breakfast stop, for 10 hours, reaching, leaning, lifting warp beams worth of strain through your back, and the stiffened cotton holding your spine and bus steady through all of it is doing the job your century assigns to a sports bra and warehouse worker's back belt, both at once. Every woman in your shed wears stays. Every woman picking coal at the Wigan pit brow wears stays. Every fishwife hauling creels, every laundress at her mangle, every farm servant pitching hay. Ask any of them to work a shift without, and they would look at you the way a modern builder would look at you if you confiscated his boots. Unsupported was how you felt undressed, and this is the social layer, and it was real, how you signalled undressed. Loose, as an insult for a woman, comes from exactly here, from laces, and going visibly unstayed in public marked you, in your own street's eyes, as slovenly at best. Now, the waist. Yours, laced comfortably over the chemise, is perhaps 27 inches. And this is where we go to the evidence, because the evidence on this question is unusually good. The corsets themselves survive in their hundreds, in museum stores, and when costume historians run the tape around them, the overwhelming run of ordinary surviving stays measure in the 20s of inches, clustering in the low to mid-20s for the young and fashionable, up through the 30s for everyone stouter. And remember the lacing gap, which means the worn waist ran an inch or 3 larger than the garment. Add the photographs, not the fashion plates, which were the era's airbrushed fantasy drawings, wasp-waisted because the artist drew them that way, but the millions of surviving photographs of actual Victorian women standing in yards and studios and mill doorways with the waists of ordinary solid human beings. Add the trade. Corsets were mass-manufactured by the million in standard sizes, and the maker's size runs are on record, and they run to dimensions no torture chamber would admit to. The 16-inch waist was not the Victorian norm. It was the Victorian tall tale, but it was somebody, and here is the grain of truth, measured honestly. Tight lacing existed. A minority, young, fashionable, urban, and statistically thin on the ground, genuinely did lace hard for effect, and a lunatic fringe within that minority chased the extreme figures. We even know where the legend got its numbers. Through the late 1860s into the 1870s, the correspondence pages of the Englishwoman's domestic magazine filled with breathless letters describing boarding school lacing regimes and 17-inch triumphs. letters which historians who have studied them read largely as fantasy and fetish writing, the Victorian internet comment section, printed because it sold copies, and about as statistically representative as comment sections usually are. And what did the mainstream of the era itself think of tight lacing? It jeered. Punch ran cartoons mocking wasp waists for decades. The doctors thundered. The Lancet took swings at tight lacing again and again. Physicians catalogued displaced organs and cracked ribs and fainting, some of it sound observation of real extreme cases, some of it moralizing exaggeration, and a dress reform movement, Victorian women, organised, campaigned against the practice from the 1880s on. Hold on to that, because it is the shape of the whole truth. Fainting grade lacing was to the Victorians roughly what extreme cosmetic surgery is to you. Real, harmful at the margin, much discussed, much condemned, and practised by a conspicuous few. A civilization does not spend 40 years satirizing and doctoring against its own universal daily habit. The scolding is the proof of the minority. As for the surgical rib removal, no documented case has ever been produced from the Victorian record, not one. And think for 2 seconds about what elective chest surgery meant in the decades when surgeons lost patients to infection after lancing a boil. It is a legend, repeated because it is deliciously awful, source to nothing. And the perpetual fainting. Women fainted in Victorian fiction and on Victorian stages constantly, because a feint was the era's great dramatic punctuation mark. And fainting in overheated, gaslit, tight-laced ballrooms did genuinely happen to the tight-laced fraction at the tight-laced end of the evening. But the fainting couch as standard household safety equipment is a myth, built backward from furniture. The chaise longue was a piece of fashionable seating, and the name fainting couch that trails it around antique shops was hung on it later. The four-loom weaver in Oldham does not faint. She cannot afford to. Fainting is for women whose looms stop when they do. So where did the caricature come from? From 3 tributaries meeting. First, the Victorians' own noise, the satire, the medical sermons, the fetish letters, which a later age read at face value, mistaking the era's scolding of its extreme for a description of its average, exactly the same error we caught in the exercise lie and the housewife lie. Second, the dress reformers and early 20th century modernisers, who had every rhetorical reason to paint the garment they were abolishing as pure torture. Nobody burns a symbol gently. And third, inevitably, the movies. In 1939, Gone with the Wind put Vivian Leigh at the bedpost being hauled to 17 inches, and that single scene, set in Georgia in 1861 and filmed in Hollywood in the age of the girdle, taught more people the history of the corset than every museum store on earth. Film costumers ever since have laced their actresses for silhouette and let the actresses' interviews about the agony write the history books. The corset the modern world remembers is a movie costume. The corset the Victorian World War is drab cotton jean, warm from a working back, hanging on a chair in Oldham. By 6 you're out in the dark with your shawl pinned, clogs ringing on the sets among 100 other pairs, breakfast can knocking your hip, stays doing their steady work under everything, unremarked as boots. 10 hours at 4 looms lie ahead, and the stays will ache less than your feet, less than your shoulders, far less than your ears, which the looms will fill with thunder until Saturday. The garment was real, the extremes were real, and the era itself mocked them. What the myth got wrong was not the existence of the laces, it was whose hands were on them, and how hard and how few. Lie number 1. Victorian women didn't work. There it is. The biggest lie of the night, the widest believed and the worst wrong, the one that all 9 of the others lean against. Say it in a room and nobody will even argue because it does not sound like a claim. It sounds like scenery. Women in those days didn't work. Work was what the husband did. The whole female half of the century sat indoors, sewing a little, visiting a little, waiting. An entire sex on furlough for 63 years. And to believe it, hold this in your hands and feel the weight of it. You have to erase several million living wage documented working women. Not misplace them. Erase them. Whole. The largest single workforce in the country. Erase so thoroughly that their own great-great-granddaughters repeat the lie back over the top of their graves. So tonight we end in the one place the erasure cannot reach, the count itself. On the night of Sunday, the 30th of March, 1851, England and Wales held its first truly modern census. Every soul, every age, every occupation, written down in one night and gathered into books that still exist, and the occupational tables of 1851, and every census, after it say the same thing in the same firm clerk's ink, somewhere around 2.75 million women and girls in Britain were returned in paid occupations in 1851. Roughly 1 in every 3 workers in the country was female, and the figure only climbed with the century. And before anyone reaches for the word exceptional, look at where they worked. Because these are not curiosities. These are the great pillars of the Victorian economy. Domestic service, the single largest occupation in the entire country for either sex. 750,000 women and girls in 1851, climbing past 1 million by the 1890s. The scale of the thing means that a vast share of all Victorian women pass through service at some point in their lives. Years of waged, contracted, live-in labour, up before 6, done after 10. The textile mills, over 500,000 women in cotton, wool and silk at mid-century. In the cotton towns of Lancashire, the majority of the mill workforce was female, and the four-loom weaver we dressed in the dark a lie ago earned real wages, week in and week out, for decades of her life. Dressmaking, millinery, and the needle trades, hundreds of thousands more. Laundry work, a whole waged industry of washerwomen, agriculture, field women, dairy women, the gang workers of the eastern counties. Add the shopkeepers and innkeepers and lodging house keepers we met in Lee number 3, the charwomen, the fisherwomen, the nurses, and by the 1890s the rising army of shop assistants, telegraph girls, board school teachers and clerks. That is the census, and the census is a count of names, and the names were attached to hands. Let me lend you some eyes one last time, and I have chosen these eyes deliberately, because they belong to the working women England found it hardest not to see, and tried hardest to unsee. It is 6 o'clock on a June morning in 1887, at the top of a colliery bank outside Wigan, Lancashire, and you are 22 years old, and you are a pit-brow lass. You do not go down the pit. The law took women out of the underground workings in 1842. After the Commission's report scandalised the country, you work the surface, the brow, where the coal comes up, and feel this workplace, because no drawing room was ever less like it. The cage bangs up from the dark, and the tubs come off rattling, and you and the other lasses tip them over the screens, and the coal roars down the iron chutes in a long grinding thunder you will hear in your sleep until you die. Your job is picking Dirt, stone, shale out of the moving coal hour after hour, your hands doing their quick certain grammar over the belt, fingertips split and blackened, rings of coal dust in every crease of your knuckles that no Saturday scrubbing ever fully lifts. The dust hangs in the air and settles on your eyelashes. You can taste the seam. You wear a flannel jacket, a headscarf tied hard, and, this is the detail all England knows you by, breeches with a rough skirt kilted up over them, because skirts and moving machinery kill, and pit girls figured that out generations before the safety inspectors wrote it down. For this you are paid about 2 shillings a day, and you've done it since you were 15, and your mother did it, and her mother. And this very spring the men in London tried to take it away from you. And here the composite eyes I have lent you brush against the hard documented record. So let me lay the record itself on the table. Through 1886 and 1887, a push in Parliament sought to ban women from pit-brow work altogether. Respectable opinion had long been scandalised by the trousers and the photographs of Wigan's breeched colliery, women sold in the stationers' shops as exotica. And the argument was made warmly and sincerely that the work was degrading to the sex and the women must be rescued from it. The women declined to be rescued. In May 1887, a deputation of pit-brow lasses from Wigan and the surrounding coalfield, supported by campaigning women in London, travelled down to Westminster and walked into the Home Office in their working clothes to see the Home Secretary, Henry Matthews, and tell him to his face that the work was healthy, the wages were theirs, and they meant to keep both. The newspapers went wall to wall. The Home Secretary received them courteously, and the ban died. The lasses took the train back north and were at the screens again within the week. That happened. It is in Hansard and in every paper of the month of May 1887. Women whose existence the modern myth flatly denies not only worked, they marched to Parliament in trousers to defend their right to go on working, and won. Now, the grain of truth, and in the biggest lie of the night, the grain is genuinely interesting, so watch its edges closely. It is this: married middle-class women, by and large, really did not hold paid employment, and, the subtler half, many married working-class women left the mill or gave up service after their weddings, because respectability urged it, and because running a Victorian household without servants was itself a crushing full day's labour, unpaid and uncounted. So a Victorian could truthfully say that most wives of a certain standing did not work, meaning waged, meaning formally, meaning countable. But mark what even that concedes. The women of the working years before marriage, the maids, the mill hands, the milliners, were nearly all in work. The unmarried and the widowed worked all their lives, and the married poor worked constantly in the half-light the census struggled to see, taking in washing, taking in lodgers, minding neighbours' children for pennies, sewing shirts at famine rates by candlelight, charring, hawking, keeping the shop's counter while the husband kept its name. The census enumerators, who were instructed in ways that under-recorded exactly this catch-as-catch-can married women's work, still counted their millions. The real total of working Victorian women was higher than the printed one, not lower. The grain of truth is one class of wives in one band of years of their lives. The lie stretched that band over an entire sex and an entire century. And so, at the last, to the question this whole night has been circling. Where did the biggest lie come from? It came from the fact that the people who wrote the record of the age were the one class the lie was almost true of. The memoirs, the novels of drawing-room life, the conduct books, the paintings, the photograph albums that survived in attics. These were made by, about and for the leisured minority, the households where the wife's withdrawal from work was the badge of arrival. The parlour wrote, the pit brow picked. When the 20th century and then Hollywood went looking for the Victorian woman, it found the class that had left a paper trail of its leisure, and mistook that parlour for the nation, the same class blindness we've caught red-handed in lie after lie tonight, here grown to its full size. The millwomen left no memoirs. They left wage books, census lines, strike notices, factory inspectors' reports, and 4 generations of descendants who were told, by the television, that Victorian women stayed home. The idle Victorian woman existed. She was real. She was often bored to the bone, and she was outnumbered, massively, provably outnumbered, by the women in service, the women at the looms, the women over the washtubs, the women behind the counters, the women on the pit brow at 6 a.m. with the coal thundering through the screens. The census does not romanticize and does not sneer. It does the one thing myths cannot survive. It counts. 2.75 million and rising in the year of the Great Exhibition, and the paper remembers every single line. That is the end of the 10, and now at last we can let the counting stop. No more numbers now, no more announcements. The countdown is finished. The 10 lies are on the table with their working shown, and the room this story has been pacing around all night can finally go quiet. Stay with me a little longer, though. Not for another argument, the arguing is done, but because 10 women lent us their eyes tonight, and you do not hand back borrowed eyes without saying good night to them properly. So before you sleep, we will walk back through the whole long day we have assembled between us, one window at a time, the way a lamplighter walks back down a street he lit at dusk, checking each flame, lowering each one. Start where we started in London with the widow. It is evening now in that story too. The parcel from Regent Street has come home on the omnibus and lies opened on her bed, the grey poplin and the mauve trim spilling half out of the paper, and she has hung the black gown on the back of the door, not thrown out, not burned, just hung up, the way you retire a uniform. 2 years it held her, and it did hold her. That is the strange mercy of the calendar nobody chose. Tomorrow the dressmaker. Some month soon, colour. She sits on the edge of the bed with her hand resting on the mauve, and the lamp hisses gently, and we will leave her there, mid-change, exactly as the record leaves every woman like her, between one cloth and the next, alive. In Shropshire, the cottage is dark except for the banked fire, and the 6th child sleeps in the basket by the bed, one fist above his head like a small triumphant boxer. His mother is not thinking of the Registrar General's tables, though she is a line in them. She is listening the way mothers listen, half asleep to the smallest breathing in the room. 995 of every 1,000. The midwife's warm, sure hands, the kettle already filled for morning. Let that room stay warm. It mostly did. In Preston, the washer's in, sheets folded and mangled and aired, kitchen still ghosted with the smell of soap and starch, and the woman with the chapped hands has finally sat down and finished a whole cup of tea while it was still hot, which is Monday's one luxury. Her hands sting less now. By Thursday the cracks will half heal. By next Monday the copper will want lighting again, and she will light it. Clean windows, clean step, clean collar on the man of the house come Sunday. It was never glamorous, and it was never nothing. It was the daily unrecorded victory, and tonight it is won again. On the Surrey road, the bicycle is home, wiped down. She wipes the machine down every ride, chain and rims, the way you care for a thing that set you free, and stood in the scullery where the landlady has grudgingly permitted it. 28 miles today. Her calves ache in the good way. On the table lie 40 spelling books to mark, and she marks them with her hair still smelling of road dust and hedges, and when she sleeps tonight she will do the downhill again behind her eyes. The wind, the roaring, the grin. 11 miles an hour. Some kinds of freedom you can measure. In Camberwell the party is over, the young man has gone home 8 correct inches at a time, and the piano is closed. Its scandalous mahogany legs standing in the dark, bare, unremarked, exactly as they stood through the entire 19th century. The sheet music is put away. The sister has said one dry sentence on the stairs that will be giggled about between the two of them for 30 years. The frilled trousers exist only in a book by a naval captain who was making fun of somebody else. Let the piano sleep too. In Manchester the gas is off over the desk. The japanned cash box is locked, and the ledger lies closed with the ink dry on the week's last line, entered by her own hand. Downstairs the stock sits in the dark, smelling of paper and glue. Hers by Act of Parliament, hers by a date you can look up. The 1st of January, 1883. Her mother sleeps down the passage. Some victories arrive too late for the people who most deserved them, and are victories anyway, and are handed forward. In Bristol, the census schedule stands propped on the mantel where the enumerator will find it, and the milliner is asleep with the order book on the night table, and through the wall the assistant snores a steady bee-song. Head of household, 27, both doors open. The wax cherries wait in their bowl for morning like improbable fruit. In Staffordshire, the last pot was drawn, and the taproom bolted at 11, and the landlady made her final round the way she has made it for 27 years. Cellar flap, yard gate, kitchen fire raked, tally book squared, and climbed the stairs past the sleeping rooms of 5 employees and 3 commercial travellers, every soul under her licence and her roof. The inn ticks and settles around her like a ship at anchor. The angel in the house was a poem. This is an inventory, and it balances. In Oldham, the stays hang over the chair back in the cold, keeping the shape of a working day, and the weaver sleeps the sleep of 10 hours and 4 looms, her ears still faintly ringing, her sister warm beside her. 5:30 comes early. The busk will be cold for a minute and then warm. No bedpost, no maid, no swoon. Click, click, click in the dark and out into the clogs and the thunder. And in Wigan, last of all, the coal dust is scrubbed to a shadow that never quite leaves the knuckles, and the pit browlass sleeps with her breeches folded on the stool like any soldier's kit. And somewhere in a London file room there is a page recording that in May of 1887 the Home Secretary of Great Britain received a deputation of women in working clothes, and heard them out and gave them their way. She was at the screens by 6 the next Monday. The thunder of the chutes, the quick, certain grammar of her hands. 2 shillings a day, and hers 10 windows, 10 lamps, lowered but left burning. And as for the women themselves, the real ones, the thousands upon thousands each of our composites stood in for. The honest last word is the one this channel always owes you. Whoever they each singly were, history closed gently over their names, as it closes over almost everyone's, and what remains is exactly what we use tonight. The schedules, the registers, the tally books and wage books and licence books. The paper remembers, even when no one else can. So let us ask once quietly the question underneath the whole night. Why were the lies told at all? Not out of malice, mostly. That is the strange thing. The lies about Victorian women were told because they were comfortable. It is comfortable to believe the past was absurd, that its women were fainting ornaments in trousered piano houses, because then the present gets to feel like the first sensible morning in history, and we get to feel like the first real people. Pity is comfortable too. Pity asks nothing. But the truth we have spent tonight assembling asks something harder and gives something better. It asks us to see them at eye level, not porcelain, not victims in general, but tired, capable, particular women. Women with license books and lacing gaps and mangle-strong forearms, who were wronged in specific documented ways and fought back in specific documented ways, who married prudently at 25 or ran shops at 27, and did not much care which we would have preferred. The myth made them quaint. The record makes them recognisable, and recognisable is so much kinder. Somewhere behind you, 4 generations, 5, 6, there is a woman who lived inside the truths we walk through tonight. She had a Monday. It smelled of soda and lie. Her name is on a schedule in an archive right now, age last birthday, rank, profession or occupation, ink a little browned, perfectly legible. She was never, not for one day of her life, the woman on the fainting couch. You come from the counted, not from the myth. You always did. And now the night can have you. Because this is where every one of those days ended. The widows, the weavers, the landladies, the schoolmistresses with her hair full of road dust. Exactly where yours is ending. In the dark, in a bed, with the day's weight going out of the body slowly like heat from a raked fire. Feel that happening to you now. It is already happening. You've been lying still a long while listening, and the listening has done its old kind work. The 10 lies rose up one by one and were taken apart, and each one taken apart weighed less than it did when the night began, and now there is nothing left in your hands at all. Empty hands, heavy arms. Good. You do not have to remember any of it. That is the last and best rule of this channel. The dates are safe on the paper. The paper does not need you awake. The census will still say 2 3/4 million in the morning. The Act of 1882 will still have taken effect on the 1st of January 1883. The bicycle is still bought. The licence still hers. The ledger still entered by her own hand. None of it needs holding. Set it all down the way the laundress set down the last folded sheet, the way the landlady closed the tally book. Let the numbers go first. They are heaviest. Then the names of the acts and the magazines. Then the streets. Regent Street, Deansgate, the Trent Valley Road, the Surrey Lane. Let them go soft and lose their edges, the way streets do at dusk, the way streets do in rain. Keep only, if you keep anything, the sounds, and even those only loosely. The way you hear a household from the room where you're falling asleep, the knock of a mallet on a spile far below, the bee-song of a snoring girl through a wall, coal settling, a mangle's slow wooden turning somewhere down a yard, the hiss of a lamp being lowered, rain on a scullery window with the washing safely in. They are good sounds. They are the sounds of things done for the day. Everything in them says the same thing over and over, and what they say is, finished now, finished now, finished now. You are warm enough. You are tired enough. You are safe enough. And that is the full list of what a sleeping body needs. The widow knew it. The weaver knew it. Every woman we walked with tonight lay down at last into exactly this. Warm enough, tired enough, safe enough. It was enough for them at the end of harder days than yours. It is enough for you. It is enough. Tomorrow there will be things to do. There always are. Tomorrow the copper wants lighting somewhere, and the looms want minding, and the order book wants opening, and your own version of all of it will be standing at the foot of the bed with its hat on. But that is tomorrow's arrangement with tomorrow's you. The two of them will manage. They always have. Right now there is only this bed, this dark, this slow breath going out longer than the breath before it, and the next one longer than that, the same as last night. The same as every night that ever lowered a lamp. The same as the nights in the attic rooms over the shops, and the nights over the tap rooms, and the nights behind the mill streets of Oldham. 140 years of nights, all of them ending the way this one is ending, in the long, slow trade of day for dark. And if you like, while the trade completes itself, you can walk back down the years the way we walk back down the street of windows, slowly, touching nothing, just passing. 1896, and a bicycle ticks as it cools in a Surrey scullery, and the night smells of oiled steel and cut hedges. 1887, and the Wigan bank stands silent under the moon, the screen stopped, the coal asleep in the earth, the breeches folded on the stool. 1885, and a busk clicks shut in your memory, far off, no louder than a latch. 1884, and a gas bracket sighs out over a closed ledger in Manchester, and the dark comes up the staircase like slow water, patient and warm. 1877, and a parcel of grey and mauve lies open on a London bed, quietly being the future. 1871, and an inn settles on its beams in Staffordshire, timber easing, cellar cool, tally squared. 1868, and a piano stands with its feet bare in a firelit room where everyone has gone up to bed happy. 1863, and the lust of the steam fades from a Preston kitchen, and the folded sheets breathe out their smell of soap and wind. 1861, and a census schedule waits on a Bristol mantel, patient as only paper is patient. 1859, and a new voice sleeps in a basket in Shropshire, and a kettle stands filled for the morning, and the fire is banked, and there is nothing in that whole house that needs doing until the sun. 10 years, 10 rooms, all quiet now. You are in every one of them tonight, and every one of them is at rest, which means you may be too. A century and a half has passed since the mornings we borrowed tonight, and the world they woke into has changed past recognition. The copper and the dolly tub are museum pieces now, polished and labelled, and children on school trips wrinkle their noses at the lie. The mills are flats and galleries, the looms are silent, the pit brows are grassed over, green hills with coal in their bones. The morning warehouse is closed a lifetime ago, and crepe is a word needing a footnote. The census schedules themselves, the very pages, the browned ink, the age last birthday, glow on screens now, searchable in seconds from the bed you're lying in. Everything about their world has been traded, rebuilt, relabelled or forgotten. But people still wash on hopeful mornings and hang the linen out, still save up, slowly, sensibly to marry when the arithmetic works, still keep small proud books of what is owed and owned, still ride out on a Saturday with the wind roaring just to feel the downhill, still sit up in the quiet after a loss, deciding when it is time for colour again. Some things do not change. The tiredness at the end of a working day does not change. The sweetness of lying down at the end of it does not change. That sweetness is in your body right now. The same vintage, the same warmth, undiluted by the century and a half. It is one of the oldest things you own. Feel how far down you have already drifted while I was saying that. Your breathing has found the night's own pace without asking you. Long, even strokes, like the waterman's oars, like the mangle's unhurried turning. Your feet are warm. The bed has finished taking your weight. It took the last of it while ago, and now there is nothing left for your muscles to do. Not one thing, and they know it. And one by one they are signing off like mill hands at the gate. Hands first, then arms, then the shoulders you have carried all day, then the small stubborn muscles around your eyes, the very last to trust the dark. Let them go too. The dark tonight is the good kind, the kind with folded sheets in it, and banked fires, and nothing owed until morning. So let it come. Let sleep take you the way it took the pit-brow lass, whose alarm was a knocker-up's pole on the window, and who slept anyway, deep and easy, because the body that works is the body that sleeps. Let it take you the way it took the milliner, mid-thought, with the order book still open on the night table, and the last bonnet trimming itself softly somewhere behind her eyes. Let the last of the dates dissolve. They were only ever handholds, and you're lying down now, and the lying down needs no holds. Let the 10 lamps go down one by one, Regent Street first, Wigan last, until the whole long street of the night is dark and even, and no one is awake in any of the windows, and there is nothing left to check on and nothing left to count. Let your thoughts slow and soften and lose their spelling, and finally stop. The lies are put away. The truth is put away too. It keeps better than lies do. It will be exactly where we left it, in the schedules and the registers and the quiet county archives, all night, all year, for as long as paper lasts. The women are all asleep now, every one at the far ends of their honest days, and they were never waiting for your pity, only perhaps for your company, and you have kept them company all night, and now you have all earned the same thing. You have earned it the ordinary way, the way it has always been earned, by getting to the end of a day. That was their secret if they had one. Not the corset, not the calendar, not the angel or the myth. Just this: day, work, dark, rest, day, work, dark, rest. A rhythm older than every lie ever told about it, older than the census and the acts and the etiquette books, older than the language the lies were told in, and still running, unbroken, and running through you now, breath by breath, easier every time. Somewhere far off, if you listen with the last of your listening, a church clock is striking a small hour over a sleeping town, the way it struck over Preston and Bristol and Wigan, the way it has struck over every bed in every one of these stories, and nobody in any of those beds counted the strokes to the end, and neither will you. The sound arrives softer and softer, as if the night itself were carrying it on tiptoe, unwilling to wake the linen, unwilling to wake the ledgers, unwilling above all to wake you. Take it, and dream, if you dream at all, of small good things, a mauve ribbon, a full order book, clean sheets smelling of wind, a long hill down with the hedges rushing by. Good night.